Shabbat Shalom. I want to thank everyone who prayed against my head cold yesterday. It's not completely gone, but it's better. And it's kind of what you can expect in this time of the year, isn't it? I'm not the only one who's been fighting things this week or these couple of weeks. But I feel very optimistic about today. I'm not sure what it is. When we sat down yesterday evening by the dining table, I just felt this is good. Something is very good. I'm not sure if it was the smell of the lamb chops and the goat cheese crumble or something else. I just think that today is a good day to be alive. We've been reading from Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 12 to 17, Yeshayahu, Isaiah 40:27 to 41:16, and Hebrews 7:1 to 10. It's the story of our father Abraham and the time where God said, Lech, Lecha, get yourself out from your nation, from your village, from everything that you call home, and go to this place that I am going to show you. And I actually brought with me a map for you today, Ephraim. It's I thought maybe the kind of map that you would see in geography lesson. It's more of an artist's impression, but I think it's very beautiful. If you're watching online, you won't be able to see it, but just Google Abraham's journey. You'll find a lot of maps. And it shows for us Ur in the Chaldeans, where he grew up, where he set out with his father. It shows Haran up in the north, where he settled down for quite a while, and where our parasha portion starts with God saying, come on, it is time into the land. So he starts moving southward through Israel, exploring. And we read about how he encountered a famine. So he runs away to Egypt, detours into Egypt. God has to send plagues onto Pharaoh to make him leave again. I wonder if it's a bit of a foreshadowing of things to come. But then he moves back into Israel, and he and Lot splits up. And Lot decides to go and live close to Sodom, which was not a great decision either. Abraham has to rescue him from captivity. He ends up in the middle of this war between the 4 nations and the 5 nations, but he wins. And he settles down in Hebron. Hebron, the place where Ishmael is born, the place where our parasha portion ends. It's not the end at all of Abraham's journeys and Abraham's adventures, but it is where our parasha ends. It describes not a very easy and laid-back life for Abraham, does it? All these things, all these adventures that he went through. It describes a really great man. We see Abraham as this wonderful, great man, our forefather, but really what's even greater than all the things that he did are the things that the consequences of what he accomplished. Everything really that we as Jews call our heritage, our nation, our people, it started right there, and then with the Lech, Lecha. You can keep it up, Ephraim, if you want to. It's a nice picture. Traditionally, today, we tend to speak about this journey, this physical journey that he did. But this journey is by far the only thing that is of importance that Abraham did. And I want to talk to you today about something else that he set in motion, a tradition that we still keep today as an echo going back all the way back to Abraham. I want to talk about the Brit Milah, the circumcision, because I was reading a lot of debate articles about this the other week, articles that really upset me, that stirred my heart. articles that spoke about the importance that the circumcision has always had for our people, but also therefore how the opponents of our people have used it to try to bring an end to us. We know in history there was bans in place against circumcision in the time of the Maccabees, also in the first few centuries in the Common Era. But really what caught my attention was the arguments from the modern-day humanistic movements that are trying to rally support for modern-day bans. And they're not doing this to outlaw Judaism per se. I think we have to be very careful before we point finger and scream anti-Semitism. It's not really what it's about. They are working against any form of religious practices that doesn't fit within their ethical framework, their world view, and they consider circumcision to be inhumane. They say that this act that we do to the 8 days old baby boy, it's not fair. He hasn't consented himself, and they are right, of course. We take him into surgery, forcing him to take on the yoke of Jewish history, Jewish mission, Jewish future in his flesh to bear every day for the rest of his life, and he has nothing to say about it. And their arguments don't stop there. The people that argue against the circumcision bans, intactivists as they're often called, they're likely to be against any form of religious upbringing, asking us if we as Jewish parents actually have the right to bring our children up in Jewish ways, restricting them from, say, ever tasting a pork sausage or running around free roaming in the candy section of a store, never to get a Christmas gift, paint an Easter egg, missing out on maybe all those birthday parties on Saturday mornings of the secular friends, maybe when they grow a little bit older, miss out on Friday evening activities. Do we have the right to do this? How much freedom should a child actually be given in this? When I was reading these arguments from the intactivists, I found two things that are missing from their arguments, two things that they don't seem to understand, that you wouldn't expect them to understand, but that we do have to understand to be able to face these attacks. The first one is that any upbringing, of course, restricts the child one way or another, be it in the socio-economic framework that you bring them up in, through the education they receive or don't receive, through the culture, the country that you bring them up in, even smaller things like what you feed them, what you dress them in, what kind of friends that you encourage them to have. However much you try as a parent, it's just not possible to teach your child all languages, make it understand all cultures of the world. You can't raise your child knowing how to deal with tight financial situations and really appreciate the value of money without ever having to worry their little heads about finances. You can't keep your child completely safe from any form of danger if you want to bring it traveling around the world, going out in nature on wild adventures. You can't both feed your child the cookie and let it keep it. And this is why a worldview that allows everything, whose main goal is to be unbiased, open towards everything, is not realistic. The question is not whether you give your child all the keys to all the doors in life, because you can't, but whether you open the right doors for them. Which brings us to the second thing that these humanistic movements tend to not understand. They see the blood and the pain as something plainly negative, something the child has to be protected from. And if this was all there was, then they would be right. If the only reason we did circumcision was because of tradition to please the parents, then maybe we should agree with their arguments. But what they fail to see is that circumcision is actually giving the child something. A very precious gift that no secular upbringing could ever give that child, that actually, if you want to put it that way, that every secular upbringing is robbing from this child. You know, this 8 days old baby boy, he already carries in his flesh a mission in life, a meaning, a task, a direction. He has what every human being craves, there inscribed in his body forever, and it's the blood that makes it possible. The blood that makes it such a strong testimony beyond what mere words or thoughts can do. God asked specifically for a sacrifice to set this baby boy off in the path that he is to walk. The same is true about any religious upbringing, right? Your child will miss out on things. He, she will be different. But he, she will grow up knowing that there is something in life that is worth sacrificing for, that there is a mission, and that he is part of it, something important, something to keep him going no matter what, when everyone around him maybe has no aim, no meaning, because in a secular worldview, there is really none. We see the consequences of this far too often on the news, children being brought up without this so important thing. It's been said that in a world where there is nothing worth sacrificing for, even dying for, there is also nothing worth living for. I don't know who came up with that first. It's been said by many people throughout the ages, but it's true, isn't it? Or if we want to put it in more street term, more everyday speech, maybe you've heard, nothing good in life comes for free. Let me give you a silly little example, something just comes into my mind thinking about this. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I went into a shop because I needed to buy a new thermometer. My thermometer was packing up. So I went over to the shop shelves and I picked up a thermometer. It said £6, and I figured that's reasonable. So I walked over to the checkout, and the cashier was scanning the thermometer, scanning it again, looking a little bit confused, walking over to the shop manager, having a little conversation. And then she came back and she told me, you can have it for 11p. So I took that. I brought the thermometer home, but I was a little bit suspicious. Had I been blessed or had I been fooled? It became very clear that I've been fooled. I tested the thermometer. It was extremely inaccurate. I gave it away as a toy to Samuel. But I wasn't surprised, right? Few things that are good in life comes for free. I wouldn't be surprised if Abraham was thinking about these things when he picked up that knife that day, holding it to his own flesh, thinking about all those blessings that the Lord had promised him, restipulated so many times. And Abraham had been waiting and waiting to see them come through. And now, at the age of 99, God adds this thing to the covenant, a painful thing. Now, many men would have walked out at this point, saying, I left my home. I've been serving you. I've been spreading your word. How can you ask this thing of me? And equally, I think many male converts throughout the ages have probably wondered themselves, they've been taken on the yoke of the Torah. They completely changed their lifestyle, their food, their calendar, their ethics. Wouldn't that have been enough? How could God ask surgery? It may not be such a big thing for a little baby boy. Now, often they get out of this room where they had the surgery and they unite with their parents and they forget all about it. It's not really as horrible as the intactivists tend to describe it, but for a grown-up man, it's something different. It requires plenty of commitment and courage, and so also for Abraham. But it's the magnitude of the sacrifice, the dedication needed to perform it, that gives it such a high value. It's not just blood spill for the sake of tradition. This blood is at the very beating heart of what it is to be Jewish. Blood and sacrifice. Now, circumcision was not by far actually the only, or even the first act of sacrifice that Abraham performed in his life. I want to tell you another story from the parasha that shows that God had prepared Abraham for his Brit Milah long before it actually happened. I want to tell you a story from chapter 14 of Bereshit, a very odd encounter with a very odd man, very mysterious man. Actually, the Jewish commentaries don't have too much to say about it at all. That's how mysterious he is. His name is Melchizedek. It says that he was the king of Salem, the city that later became Jerusalem. And it says that he was a Cohen of El Elyon. Now, he wasn't a descendant of Abraham. He was some kind of ancient priest, pre-Moshe, before the temple, but a god or a priest who somehow still served God, who recognized God's voice, who recognized Abraham as a servant and was eager to run out and bless him. And this is not just a mysterious story because of this priest that we don't know much about. It's a mysterious story, I think, also for those who have been thinking about Abraham as the only person alive who worshipped God. Like, I've been taught many times that Abraham was actually the only follower of God. That's why he was chosen. He was there, surrounded by all these pagans. He was the only one. Turns out we have this king / priest who was also a believer of God. And actually, if you think about it, it is the oral tradition that is teaching us all these things about Abraham being surrounded by pagans. If you read the Bible, just face value, it's quite likely that there were a lot of people who knew God at those days. Remember last week, Joseph said that Noah might have met Adam. Now Abraham might have met Noah. The generations were that long back then. And I really do struggle to think that the stories of a worldwide flood or that of the creation of the world would have just gotten lost, forgotten, especially when the man who sailed the ark was actually living, breathing, walking among them. What is it that says that Lot wasn't a follower of God, that he hadn't been sitting down discussing all these stories with Abraham, and that this was actually the reason why he decided to go with Abraham when no one else did? I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm just saying that it's not an impossibility. And we also have the king of Salem. Now, a king is not just a king without a nation. He has a nation. And you remember back in the days, it was the king who decided which god a nation would worship. You get a new king, you get a new God. So the odds are quite high that the whole population of Old Jerusalem were, at least on paper, worshippers of God Most High. So if you consider this, that Abraham was not at all the only one who was a believer back then, consider who Abraham was, why God called him out, why he was special. Why not Melchizedek? We have the Messianic writings that describes him as king of righteousness, comparing him to Yeshua, the Lord himself. Many people have asked this question, why not Melchizedek? He was righteous. Now, I can't answer this question for you. I can't try to assign personalities, motivations of all of these hypothetical people. But I think maybe we can learn something by just looking at Abraham and the remarkable traits that he had. For an example, his reaction when he met the king of Salem. Abraham could have lorded his position over him. Think about it. He was the chosen one. Abraham was the chosen by God. And then the king comes in and pays him all this respect and blesses him. Abraham could have been looking down at that and gone, yes, I'm the one. Look at me. But if you read the story, it's obvious that Abraham is the one who's paying the most respect. In fact, he gives Melchizedek 10% of the spoils of the war. 10% to Melchizedek, 10% to the Lord. Actually, he doesn't even only give this tithe, the first tithe. The Bible says that he doesn't keep anything for himself. That's our Abraham. He tells the king of Sodom that he gives 10% to the Lord and that his allies can take whatever they have earned, but for himself, he will keep nothing. Remember what Rabbi said last week. Follow the money. Look where the money is, and that's where the heart will be. Not that the heart should follow the money, the other way around. The heart will put the money where its priorities are. And then really, a tithe is not much. If you consider that God is number one in your life, number one in your heart, 10% is nothing. Abraham realized that. He gave everything. And such a strong testimony it was. By his actions, by his words, he's clearly showing to the king of Sodom that his God is not a joke, that his God is worthy of everything. The working title of this sermon, when I started writing it, was Only Sacrifice Create Things of Value. That's the story that I read coming through the pages, reading about Abraham and his life, the key to how he created, painfully gave birth to the Jewish nation, leaving his home behind, not hesitating to give away everything of what he had, not even stopping at sacrificing his own blood. Now we know this principle is true, don't we? If you've ever learned something that is hard, never made something very ambitious, created something very ambitious in your life, you know it's true. Ask the guitarist among us about the blistering fingers playing through those hours of pain before the skin thickens up. Or ask anyone who's done any hard sporting, 10-kilometer runs perhaps. Ask them about those cold evenings, rainy mornings in the track, when they could have been sitting at home drinking a nice cup of hot coffee. But ask them if it was worth it. I believe they say that it was. Or ask the person who gave up his throne in heaven to come down, to suffer the most horrible thing someone can get through, being ripped away from his Father's presence by the claws of the combined sins of mankind. But ask yourself, if not this sacrifice gave you the most valuable gift you could ever have been given. Now, one thing that really hurts me in all of this, that I see more and more, is how people are losing a grip of this concept. The concept of being so dedicated to something that it is worth sacrificing for. The reason why people struggle so much to understand why circumcision can actually lead to something good, why someone can actually be willing to do it without being forced just by their own free will. You have to look far and wide to find that in people nowadays, even when it comes to smaller things. And I think I'm starting to get a little bit cynical in all of this. Now, I noticed it last week. A colleague of mine came up to me and he was complaining. He was saying that the volunteers in his medical trial, they hadn't all submitted their samples to him so he could analyze it. And he was all surprised about this. And I just shook my head and said, no, this is what you can expect. They may feel very enthusiastic about it one day, and then they wake up the morning after and don't feel like it any longer, abandon it. No matter, in this case, it's actually causing problems for someone. No, it's even worse when it comes to believers. Maybe some of you have ever heard a believer say, I know that this is right. I know this is what God is calling me to. Then nothing comes out of it. Why? Because when this conversation turns into time for action, it becomes obvious that there is a sacrifice needed. Maybe time, maybe money, maybe comfort. But this person decides that it's too much. He will not, robbing God, robbing himself, very likely, from something very important. You know, I don't want to rant. I live in this world too. I am as guilty as everyone else of this. But I would like you to today look at the story of Abraham as an example of how it's only through great sacrifice that you can create the things that are most precious in life. That when you're following God is creating problems for you, maybe you have to give something up. That could be a sign that He's leading you on a treasure hunt towards something very great and shiny. Because only through great sacrifice can we achieve the things that are of great value. Amen. Thank you so much.